Hello, everyone. Welcome in. How's everyone doing? How's your day been? It is a happy hump day. As I said, I was at the physiotherapist earlier, and my back is feeling a little bit better, fortunately. She basically taught me how to exercise the right way. And not many people know how to, so they end up injuring themselves, like I did. So, yeah, at least I know some do's and don'ts. And are you all hydrating? Have you all eaten? Have you all taken your meds? And have you said something kind about yourself today? Because you really should. So those of you who were here for yesterday's reading, you know how understimulated but hydrated. That's okay. Well, then I will be kind to you for you, with consent. If you were here for the reading yesterday, you'll know that I went on this very well-deserved rant on whiteness and colonization and white supremacy and the idea that the West kind of uses the struggles of people from the global South to further their agenda and their great replacement theory. And somebody on YouTube commented, "But here you are speaking English using white technology," and I was just like, "Oh, do I want to deal with you? Do I really want to deal with you? If a white person really wants to, please go ahead to my YouTube and respond to that comment, please. Thank you." Consent given, yay. So I'm going to be kind to you and tell you that you are a wonderful human being. You're doing okay. And we got you. Yeah, Charles. I feel it in my bones. But on to more white people fuckery. We are reading Orientalism. Today is a new goal. And if you didn't join us last year when we started this book, it is really, really dense. So I would suggest that you follow along with the text if you have it, or you can get into my server. Please click you agree to the rules, otherwise you won't get access to the rest of the server. And yeah, you can follow along with the PDF that I have there in the library. Where we stopped at the end of last year was Renan. And Renan argues that man is not an inventor because the age of creation is over. And so here we get to him fleshing out his progress through connections, making connections with the Orient, looking at Western or Occidental patterns. So he said at the end of his undistinguished essay on the origins of language, man is no longer inventor, and the age of creation is definitely over. There was a period at which we could only guess that man was literally transported from silence into words. And language gave us a hell of a lot of power because it enabled us to communicate not just needs but thoughts and ideas. After that, there was language, and for the true scientist, the task is now to imagine how language is and not how it came about. Pirate. Yet, if Renan dispels this passionate creation of primitive times, which had excited Herder, Vico, Rousseau, even Quinet and Michelet, he instates a new and deliberate type of artificial creation, one that is performed as a result of scientific analysis. In his basically inaugural lecture at the Collège de France in 1862, Renan proclaimed his lectures open to the public so it might see firsthand the varied laboratory of philological science. Any reader of Renan would have understood that such a statement was also meant to carry a typical, if rather limp irony, one less intended to shock than passively to delight. Renan was succeeding to the chair of Hebrew, and his lecture was on the contribution of Semitic peoples to the history of civilization. Arabic was taken out of this. Just so you know, even though Arabic is a Semitic language. What more subtle affront could there be to sacred history than the substitution of a philological laboratory for divine intervention in history? And what more telling way was there of declaring the Orient's contemporary relevance to be simply as material for European investigation? Oh, I didn't see. So, in various ways, Saïd has been saying throughout the book that everything has been done through a Western lens. But this was very purposeful. This was no idea of like just, oh, this is the natural order of things. This was making it the natural order of things. Putting the Orient as uncivilized and the Occident as civilized. So substituting the realities that Renan actually saw within the development of Semitic languages and replacing it with a European ideology of there only being one Semitic language, and that was Hebrew, and that was the language of the Bible, which it wasn't even the language of the Bible. The language of the Bible was Aramaic, and its closest relative in modern times is Arabic. Wild, huh? Sayce's comparatively lifeless fragments, arranged in tableaux, were now being replaced with something new. The stirring peroration with which Renan concluded his lecture had another function than to simply connect Oriental Semitic philology with the future and science, which he basically said, the Bible was made in Latin by the Romans. What have the Romans ever done for us? Yeah, apparently. Yeah. No, Geeky's position on Arabic is really, really interesting. I love hearing them speak about the Semitic languages. I mean, the Bible was written in Orthodox Hebrew and Greek, but like the language of the time was Aramaic. Translated into Hebrew, translated into Greek, translated into this, translated into that. Don't get me started. Okay, I'll tell them. Shells, are you in my server? It's only been translated 300 times. Absolutely, JJ. The position that he takes here is that all scientific discovery comes from the West. Okay, now I'm going to mispronounce this name. Etienne Quatremer, who immediately preceded Renan as the chair of Hebrew, was a scholar who seemed to exemplify the popular caricature of what a scholar was like. A man of prodigiously industrious and pedantic habits, he went about his work. Now, I'm imagining, which Pratchett book is it where the scholar finally dies and then he comes back to life? Deal? Which one? Is it Equal Rights?
He doesn't come back to life.
Well, he doesn't come back to life. It's just that the afterlife has no place for him
Yeah, equal rights.
because it's closed.
Not because it's closed.
Closed. Because death's not working. Yeah. So, yeah, death was given a clock. And so that's exactly what I imagine these old scholars to be like. Those frumpy men in big robes and who look far more self-important than they actually are. Renan said in a relatively unfeeling memorial minute for the Journal of Debates in October 1857, like a laborious worker who, even in rendering immense services, nevertheless could not see the whole edifice being constructed. The edifice was nothing less than the historical science of the human spirit, now in the process of being built stone by stone by the West. Just as Quatremer was not of his age, so Renan in his work was determined to be of it. This is one thing that I can give him. Renan, in most senses of academia, tried to be as contemporary as possible. If the Orient had been hitherto identified exclusively and indiscriminately with India and China, Renan's ambition was to carve out the new Oriental province for himself, in this case the Semitic Orient. He had no doubt remarked the casual and surely current confusion of Arabic with Sanskrit, as Balzac did, where the fateful talisman's Arabic script is described as Sanskrit, because they didn't care enough. It's all just brown people languages to them. He made it his job accordingly to do for the Semitic languages what Bopp had done for the Indo-European, so he said in the 1855 preface to the Comparative Semitic Treatise. Therefore, his plans were to bring the Semitic languages into sharp and glorious focus in à la Bopp, in addition to elevate the study of these neglected, quote-unquote, inferior languages to the level of a passionate new science, à la Louis Lambert. On more than one occasion, Renan was quite explicit in his assertions that Semites and Semitic were creations of Orientalist philological study. He is correct there. That we would not differentiate between the Semitic languages and the non-Semitic Oriental languages had it not been for Western powers going in and saying, "Oh, this is how we are classifying your languages." Since he was the man who did the study, there was meant to be little ambiguity about his centrality in this new artificial creation. But how did he mean the word creation in these instances? And how was this creation connected with either natural creation or the creation ascribed by writers like Renan and others to the laboratory and classificatory of the natural sciences, principally what was called philosophical anatomy? Hi, Eric. Here, the West is given the power of creation. They are given the power of creation because they are writing the language of discovery. Here we must speculate a little. Throughout his career, Renan seemed to imagine the role of science in human life, and I quote in translation as literally as I can, telling, speaking, or articulating definitively to a man the word logos of things. the logos of things. So science gives speech to things, better yet, brings out, causes to be pronounced, and potential speech with things. The special value of linguistics as the new philological study was often called. It's not that natural science resembles it, but rather it treats the world as natural, otherwise silent objects, which are made to give up their secrets. And here is where the supremacy comes in, because they treated the Orient as such. Not as people to have conversations with, not as cultures to be understood, but as a scientific object that they could name and study as a matter of observation. The major breakthrough in the study of the inscriptions and hieroglyphs was the discovery by Champollion. And the symbols on the Rosetta Stone had phonetic as well as semantic components. To make objects speak, so to speak, was like making words speak, giving them circumstantial value and a precise place in a rule-governed order of regularity. And therein lies the meaning, the making of meaning. Because it had circumstantial value, whatever value it had to the West was the value it held. If Hebrew did not hold any value to the West, just say if the Crusades never happened and the Bible didn't spread and Christianity was never made into the European religion that it is today, would Hebrew have had any value to European people? Probably not. In its first sense, creation, as Renan used the word, signified the articulation by which an object like Semitic could be seen as a creature of sorts. Second, creation signified the setting, in this case, of Semitic it meant Oriental history, culture, race, and mind, illuminated and brought forward from its reticence by the European scientist. Finally, creation being the formulation of a system of classification by which it was possible to see the object in question comparatively with other like objects, and by comparatively, Renan intended a complex network of paradigmatic relations that was obtained between the Semitic and the Indo-European languages. Hi, Taro. Good to see you. I'm excited to be back. And I have such a problem with the whole idea of Indo-European languages because the Indo part of those languages were seen as the oldest in the world, the Europeans had to insert themselves in there and say, yeah, we want to be part of that. Ancient Sanskrit is still used today. They call it a dead language. It's still used today. If, in what I have said so far, I have insisted so much on Renan's comparatively forgotten study of Semitic languages, it has been for several important reasons. Semitic was a scientific study to which Renan turned right after the loss of his Christian faith. I described above how he came to see the study of Semitic as replacing his faith, enabling a critical future relation with it. The study of Semitic was Renan's first full-length Orientalist and scientific study, finished in 1847, published first in 1855, and was much the part of his later major works on the origins of Christianity and history of the late Jewish people, as it was a propedeutic for them. In intention, if not perhaps achievement, interestingly, few of the standard of contemporary works in either linguistic or Orientalist history cite Renan with anything more than cursory attention. I think it's really important that people do study Renan when they're studying Western supremacy and Orientalism and the ways in which essentially meaning-making worked in the West. Because he was possibly the first person in Europe to posit those kinds of statements and also be right about them, even though they were supremacist in basis. He was really right about it. He was essentially just telling the truth. He's like, everything exists in relation to Europe because Europe is superior. That is essentially what he was saying. His Semitic opus was proposed as a philological breakthrough, from which in later years he was always to draw retrospective authority for his positions, almost always bad ones though, on religion, race, and nationalism. Instead of looking at the actual breakdown of how he came about, his methodology essentially, which was the part that had the most value, his ideas on religion, race, and nationalism were not that grand. Whenever he wished to make a statement about either the Jewish people or the Muslim people, for example, it was always with his remarkably harsh and unfounded, except according to the science that he was practicing, structures of this on the Semites in his mind. Furthermore, Renan's Semitic was meant as a contribution both to the development of Indo-European linguistics and the differentiation of Orientalism. To the former, Semitic was degraded both in moral and biological senses, whereas the latter Semitic was, if not the stable form of cultural decadence. Semitic was Renan's first creation, a fiction invented by him in the philological laboratory to satisfy his sense of public space and mission. It should be by no means lost on us that Semitic was, for Renan's ego, the symbol of European and consequently his dominion over the Orient and over his own era. Therefore, as a branch of the Orient, Semitic was not fully a natural object, like a species of monkey, for instance, nor fully an unnatural or divine object, as it had once been considered. So people considered the Bible as being written in a holy language. Like Rome considers Latin a holy language. Even India considers Sanskrit a holy language. It was seen as being brought into European consciousness so that they could have the ideological control over how it was portrayed. And I'll get to another point that is kind of in my head. Semitic and eugenics. I will explain my train of thought when I've actually placed the golden thread. Rather, Semitic occupied a median position, legitimated in its oddities rather than being defined by Indo-European by an inverse relation to quote-unquote normal languages, comprehended as eccentric, quasi-monstrous, a phenomenon partly because libraries, laboratories, and museums could serve as its place of exhibition and analysis. And that's exactly what Orientalists have done throughout history. That is exactly what colonizers have done throughout history, is display our languages, our dress, our food, our cultures, our very existence as places of exhibition and analysis, instead of belonging to and coming from and being part of living, breathing people. And this is what we're seeing in Iran right now. How we're seeing it in Iran is people saying, oh, but this is what the people of Iran want. The people of Iran don't want their government. The people of Iran were always against their government. The people of Iran want this and that and whatnot. And I'm like, how the fuck do you know when you've dehumanized them for your entire understanding of what Iran is as a country? It stems from thinking like this. that we get to that paternalistic idea of the West knows what is best for a country like Iran that is going through violent protests against a government that was enabled by the US and Britain as well. In his treatise, Renan adopted a tone of voice and method of exposition that drew the maximum from book learning and from natural observation, as practiced by men like Cuvier and Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire. This is an important aspect to stylistic achievement, for it allowed Renan consistently to avail himself of the library rather than primitively or divine fiat as a conceptual framework in which to understand language, together with the museum, which is where the results of the laboratory observation are delivered for exhibition, study, and teaching. Everywhere, Renan treats of normal human facts, language, history, culture, mind, imagination, as transformed into something else, as something particularly deviant because they are Semitic and Oriental, and because they end up for analysis in the laboratory, rather than being of the West and therefore considered normal. Thus, Semites are rabid monotheists who produce no mythology, art, commerce, or civilization. Their consciousness is narrow and rigid. All in all, they represent the combination of inferior qualities of human nature. At the same time, Renan wants it understood that he speaks of a prototype, not a real Semitic type with actual existence, although he violated this too by discussing present-day Jewish and Muslim people with less than scientific detachment in many places of his writing, because he was Islamophobic and absolutely anti-Jewish. So on one hand, we have the transformation of the human into a specimen, and on the other, the comparative judgment rendered by which the specimen remains a specimen and a subject for philological scientific study by the West. The East or the Orient is always an object of study. Scattered through I have to translate this in my head, the general history of comparative systems in the Semitic languages are reflections on the links between linguistics and anatomy, and, for Renan, this is equally important, remarks on how these links could be employed to do human history, or the science of history. But we should first consider the implicit links. I do not think wrong or an exaggeration to say a typical page of Renan's Orientalist general history was constructed typographically and structurally with the page of comparative philosophical anatomy, in the style of Saint-Hilaire and Cuvier. Both linguists and anatomists purport to be speaking about matters not directly obtainable or observable in nature. A skeleton, a detailed line drawing of a muscle, as much paradigms constituted by linguists out of purely hypothetical Proto-Semitic or Proto-Indo-European languages, are simply products of the lab and of the library. Sorry, I must have missed a word there. But you kind of get what I mean here, because just as these abstract ideas of the things that only the scientist could actually depict, therefore, like Orientalist ideas, people, languages, cultures, food, etc., are displayed as such by the Orientalist. This is all hypothetical to them. And this is why whenever a white man goes onto a panel to debate human rights, I just shrug and say, oh, okay. Because I'm tired. For them, they can play devil's advocate, because the suffering and the struggles that people who are fighting for these rights go through is all hypothetical to them. They don't have to live it. The text of a linguistic or an anatomical work bears the same general relation to nature or actuality that a museum case exhibiting a specimen mammal or an organ does. What is given on the page and in the museum case is a truncated exaggeration, like many of Sayce's Oriental extracts, whose purpose it was to exhibit a relationship between science or scientist and object, not one between object and nature. Read almost any page by Renan on Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, or Proto-Semitic, and you read a fact of power. Exactly, Charles. It gaslights all our experiences, because, and this is what I was feeling in Maddie's live the other day. I think it was Monday night. I was just like, how do you believe this? How do you still believe? After every single text, every single study, every single conversation with historians and discovery of stuff that was lost or buried or hidden, how do you still believe that African people sold their own people as slaves? How do you still believe that when it's been debunked time and time again? How do you believe, honestly, truly believe, that there is any sense of comparison between any other form of slavery and chattel slavery? How can you say but the Arabs, when there was nothing like chattel slavery ever in any other part of the world, and never performed by any other people except white people? How do you have such cognitive dissonance? It comes from here. It comes from the very loud, very wrong, very, very self-important studies of philology that started the West thinking that they had a right to our narratives. Absolutely, Charles. It's weaponized incompetence. Power by which the Orientalist philologist authority summons out of the library at will examples of man's speech, ranges of them there surrounded by suave European prose that points out defects, virtues, barbarisms, shortcomings in the language, people, and civilization. The tone and tense of the exhibition are cast almost uniformly in the contemporary present, so that one is given an impression of a pedagogical demonstration during which the scholar-scientist stands before us on a lecture laboratory platform, creating, confining, and judging the material he discusses, without a single thought given to the people behind those languages. This anxiety on Renan's part to convey the sense of demonstration taking place is heightened when he remarks explicitly that whereas anatomy employs stable and visible signs by which to consign objects to classes, linguistics does not, but they tried anyway, obviously. Therefore, the philologist must be given a linguistic fact corresponding in some way to a historical period, hence the possibility of a classification. And because the white man never learnt the languages that they studied, never fully learnt the languages that they studied in all of its contemporary glory, they were working on antiquity, old ideas that didn't exist anymore. Therefore, the philologist must make a given linguistic fact correspond in some way to a historical period, possibility of a classification. Why are Europeans so bothered with classification? Putting things into boxes. I just want to know, Quite simply, if anyone can explain to me why Europeans are so obsessed with classifying things, somebody please tell me. Renan was often to say linguistic temporality and history are full of enormous discontinuities, hypothetical periods, and linguistic events occur in nonlinear and discontinuous temporal dimension that is then to be controlled by the linguist in a very particular way. When they name it, they claim it. Actually, that's very good. Both ideas, linear ideology, naming it, claiming it. I think it goes further than that, though. Like the need to package things neatly. I think there's something deeper behind it. Let me have a think. That way, as Renan's whole treatise on the Semitic branch of Oriental languages goes far to show its comparative Indo-European as taken as the living organic norm, the Semitic Oriental languages are seen to be inorganic. I would disagree with the Saïd here. Why do white people ask me to give them indigenous names? Oh, yes. Mm. Mm. That's a kick in the teeth. Because even though... Okay, I have ideas and I will formulate them. There's just way too many things going on in my head right now. I was given one. It still doesn't make me indigenous to this country. Time is transformed into the space of comparative classification, which at the bottom is based on a rigid binary opposition between organic and inorganic languages. So on one hand, there is the organic, biologically generative process represented by Indo-European, emphasis on the European, while on the other there's an inorganic, essentially unregenerative process ossified into Semitic. Most important, he makes it absolutely clear that such an imperious judgment is made by the philologist in his laboratory, and judgment is made and for the distinctions of the kind that he has been concerned with are neither possible nor available for anyone except the trained professional. Oh, you have to have your doctorate just to look at this. Okay, so let me tell you about my trip to Cambridge. Yellow tape? So, oh yeah, oh absolutely. The yellow tape, yeah, the yellow taped practice. Oh yeah, I mean, you don't need a doctorate. to understand certain things. Like, some of the smartest people I know barely finished high school. Um, what was I going to say? Oh, yes, Cambridge. So I went there. I got there very early on a Sunday morning, which was a mistake on my part because I was very hungover, and got taken around the town. So, in a true academic snobbery, Cambridge is split into the townies and the gownies. The townies are looked down upon by the gownies. You can guess which are which. Because Cambridge is a city. It's not just a university town. Cambridge is a city. And the gownies, the students, the graduates, the people that Cambridge, is associated with, the university, are very hoity-toity and high and mighty. Except one lecturer I met there, Priya Gopal. If you ever look up any Cambridge lecturer, look up Priya Gopal. She is fantastic. There's a sense of false authority. Like, I have the same piece of paper that you have. I have 4 of them. But you are looking down at me because your piece of paper is from this colonial institution. Got you. And there's a specific lawn that only the fellows are allowed to walk on. Literally a patch of grass. And if any of you in here are British, grass is everywhere in England. It's not like just curated lawns, like grass, just everywhere. Just rolling hills of grass. Between every city. You go on a train from London to Liverpool, all you'll see in between is grass. Yeah, Eric. Not enough the right kind of grass. No, the UK does not have HBCUs. This specific lawn is only for fellows. I'm like, how in the ever-loving fuck are you going to tell people not to walk on a specific patch of grass because you didn't have this privilege, often unearned? So, what did I do? I walked across the lawn. Because fuck them. Hi, Saïd. And sometimes, fellow grass. Sometimes all you need to do to piss off the powers that be. I wanted to do the Running Man. Thank you. Sometimes all you need to do to piss off authority is just be yourself. All I have to do is exist in my very brown skin and audacious nature. Yeah. Nationalize it and make it a public toilet? Yeah. Call it John. I got very, very off topic here. Oh, basically, he said, we refuse to allow that Semitic languages have the capacity to regenerate themselves, even while recognizing that they do not escape, any more than other products of human consciousness, the necessity of change or successive modifications. Oh, yeah, it did. Which is funny, because Britain, France, the US, Germany, Italy, you know, the Beatles, the Beatles of fascism, put a lot of money into regenerating what we now know today as Hebrew, as is practiced in Israel. So much for a lack of regenerative qualities of the Semitic language. Even behind this radical opposition, there is one other working in Renan's mind, and for several pages in his first chapter of Book 5, he exposes his position quite candidly. This occurs when he introduces Saint-Hilaire's views on the degradation of types. It did not start with eugenics. Just putting that there. Although Renan does not specify which Saint-Hilaire he refers to, the reference is clear enough. Both Etienne and his son Isidore were biological speculators of extraordinary fame and influence, particularly among literary intellectuals during the first half of the 19th century of France. Etienne, we recall, had been a member of the Napoleonic expedition, and Balzac dedicated an important section of his La Comédie Humaine to him. There is also much evidence that Flaubert read both the father and the son and used their views on his work. Not only were Etienne and Isidore legatees of the tradition of the Romantic biology, which included Goethe and Cuvier, with a strong interest in analogy, homology, and organic Urform, or the uber form of species. But they were also specialists in the philosophy and anatomy of monstrosity, teratology, as Isidore called it, in which the most horrendous physiological aberrations were considered a result of internal degradation within the species life of a race, essentially. I cannot go into the intricacies, as well as the macabre fascination of teratology, although it is enough to mention that both Etienne and Isidore exploited the theoretical power of linguistics to explain deviations within the biological system. Of course they did. Thus, Etienne's notion was that the monster is an anomaly, in the same sense that in language words exist in analogical and anomalous relations with each other. In linguistics, the idea is at least as old as Varro's the language of Latin. No anomaly confirms the regular structure binding together all members of the same class. Such a view is daring in anatomy. At what moment in the préliminaire, or the preface to his philosophy of anatomy, Etienne says, And indeed, such is the character of our epoch that it becomes impossible today to enclose oneself strictly within the framework of monograph. Study an object in isolation and you will only be able to bring it back to itself. Consequently, you can never have perfect knowledge of it, but see it in the midst of beings who are connected with each other in many different ways, which are isolated from each other in different ways, and which you will discover for this object a wider scope of relationships. First, you will know it better, even in specificity, but by considering it at the very center of its own sphere of activity, you will know precisely how it behaves in its own exterior world. You will know how its own features are constituted in reaction to its surrounding milieu. Not only is he saying that this is a specific character of contemporary study from 1822 to examine phenomena comparatively, he's also saying that for the scientist there is no such thing as a phenomenon, no matter how abhorrent and exceptional, that cannot be explained with reference to other phenomena. He employs the metaphor of centrality, later used by Renan, to describe the position occupied by any object in nature, including that of the philosopher himself. The object is scientifically placed by the scientist. Thereafter, between the object and scientist is a bond of sympathy established. Of course, this can only take place during the laboratory experiment and experience and not elsewhere. A scientist has at his disposal a leverage by which even the totally unusual occurrence can be seen naturally and known scientifically, which in this case means without recourse to the supernatural, and with recourse only to an enveloping environment constituted by the scientist himself. As a result, nature itself can be perceived as continuous, harmoniously coherent, and fundamentally intelligible. And that is where I will stop for today. Any questions? All right, I'm going to say goodbye to you on Twitch and YouTube. Fare thee well. I shall see you same time, different book tomorrow. Remember, eat something, take your meds, and say something kind about yourself. And see you tomorrow. Bye.